The iconic Chun-Li. There is no doubt that the First Lady of fighting games is one of the most beloved characters in gaming. Her legacy in the Street Fighter series and beyond now stretches over 30 years, with her continuing to pick up new admirers right up until this very day. While this character is hugely celebrated, what if I were to tell you that if you were to look into the lore surrounding this fighter, that upon closer inspection she could not possibly be the kind, warm-hearted soul that the Street Fighter franchise suggests her to be. Instead, she could be one of the most sinister and shady figures in the entire series. So with all of that said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is why Chun-Li is a secret villain. Yeah. To start today's tale off, covering this rather unscrupulous individual, we need to go back to Chun-Li's roots and revisit the trauma that drives the so-called strongest woman in the world. Trained in martial arts by her father, the man mysteriously disappeared while working for Interpol. This led to Chun-Li deciding to follow in his footsteps and become a detective herself, hoping to find out what happened to him. Working for the same organisation, she soon discovered he had been investigating Shadaloo. In the Street Fighter Alpha series, her earliest appearance in the gaming timeline, she discovers that M. Bison is responsible for his murder. In Alpha 2, the retconned version of this story, he escapes in a helicopter, but Chun-Li successfully gathers this new info, leading to her receiving a job promotion, becoming a special investigator. Firstly, before we even get to the most disturbing thing about Chun-Li's backstory, it is worth noting that once she learned of M. Bison killing her father, she would become obsessed with acting revenge on his murderer. The concept of revenge is often associated with seeking justice or retribution for a perceived wrong or harm that has been done. From a moral standpoint, revenge is often viewed as negative or harmful because it involves intentionally causing harm or suffering to another person as a response to their actions. It can perpetuate a cycle of violence, escalate conflicts, and hinder opportunities for forgiveness and reconciliation. Many ethical and philosophical frameworks emphasize the importance of compassion, empathy, and non-violence as fundamental principles, so revenge typically goes against these principles by promoting harm rather than understanding and resolution. While this is the case, some argue that revenge can be seen as a form of justice or means of restoring balance in certain circumstances, with Chun-Li clearly being one of those people. Ultimately, whether revenge is considered evil or not is subjective and can depend on the specific context and underlying principles one adheres to, so it's important to carefully consider the consequences and ethical implications before engaging in revengeful actions. Regardless of what you think of this, revenge seems to be the sole thing that drives Chun-Li forward. While I am not one to write her off as evil for being vengeful, I would certainly factor her desire for revenge against M. Bison as a primary factor in a lot of the other questionable life decisions she has likely made, which we will soon get to, so let's discuss what happened next for her. After it appeared M. Bison was killed in Street Fighter 2, we are shown a scene of Chun-Li praying beside her father's grave. She believes he can now rest peacefully, as with Bison dead, he is avenged. Believing the Shadaloo boss has gone forever, this sees her quitting her job at Interpol, so she can begin living a more peaceful life away from the drama. Unfortunately for Chun-Li though, M. Bison would be back to cause more trouble, which would result in her returning to work with Interpol for the plot of Street Fighter 4. Then later, Street Fighter 5 with her resuming on her revenge mission to take out M. Bison. In the game's plot, Ryu ends up being the one responsible for defeating him. Throughout Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter 6, the games that canonically follow 5, Chun-Li continues to work with Interpol, with by 6 her being promoted as a director of its Special Criminal Intelligence Division. So throughout the Street Fighter timeline, she has spent a great deal of time working for this organisation to the point where she even holds a high rank within. Chun-Li's previous bloodlust to track down and ensure M. Bison was killed would not have been possible if it were not for the fact that she worked for Interpol. But as stated earlier, the revenge part of Chun-Li's character is not the part that makes her dark. It's the hoops she would be willing to jump through and crimes against humanity she may have needed to be a part of to make it high up in the Chinese division of Interpol in the first place. So let me try and break down further exactly what I mean. If you played Street Fighter 2 back in the day and managed to beat the game with Zangief, his ending sees him celebrating with real-life final president of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev. This indicates that the Street Fighter universe is parallel to ours. We know for a fact that the USSR had the same president as in the real world, and we know that Interpol exists in this world too, meaning Interpol's history in Street Fighter likely mirrors the real Interpol. Speaking of Interpol, while this is a name for a group many have heard of, it doesn't seem many people know much about them whatsoever. So who exactly are they? Interpol, also known as the International Criminal Police Organization, is an intergovernmental organization that facilitates international police cooperation. It was established in 1923 and currently has 194 member countries. The primary goal of Interpol is to promote cross-border law enforcement cooperation, support member countries in combating international crime, and facilitate the exchange of information and intelligence between law enforcement agencies worldwide. Interpol operates through a network of national central bureaus established in member countries, which serve as contact points for coordinating and facilitating international police cooperation. Interpol assists member countries in various areas, including combating terrorism, organised crime, cybercrime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and fugitive investigations. It provides a platform for police agencies from different countries to collaborate and share information on criminal activities that have an international dimension. The organisation also issues notices, such as red notices seeking the location and arrest of wanted individuals, blue notices seeking information about unidentified persons, and other colour-coded notices to alert member countries about individuals or objects of interest in criminal investigations. Contrary to popular belief, Chun-Li is not a police officer herself, as Interpol does not have its own law enforcement officers. Instead, it acts as a central hub for member countries to cooperate and collaborate on transnational law enforcement matters. The organisation operates under a constitution and framework governed by its General Assembly, Executive Committee and a General Secretariat based in Lyon, France. So you now might be thinking, cross-border law enforcement sounds very dystopian, and not making any sense, considering how laws are so drastically different in, say, democratic countries in Western Europe to, say, an autocratic authoritarian state, such as the so-called People's Republic of China. So does this mean you can call President Xi Winnie the Pooh in the United States, then get sent to China to be punished? Well, thankfully not. You see, Interpol claims to seek to remain politically neutral, and is thus barred from interventions or activities that are political, military, religious or racial in nature, and thus avoid involving themselves in disputes over such matters. So Chun-Li and Interpol are solely a force for good, right? Well, not quite. Especially when it comes to the Chinese wing of Interpol in particular. Despite proclaiming to have a politically neutral stance, the Chinese branch of Interpol have been heavily criticised for abusing mechanisms of international investigations, resulting in politically motivated prosecutions. In November 2016, Meng Hongwei, a politician from the People's Republic of China, was elected president during the 85th Interpol General Assembly and was to serve in the capacity until 2020. Unfortunately for him, like Chun-Li's father, Meng would go mysteriously missing. Returning to China after a flight from France, his wife received a text featuring a single emoji of a knife, suggesting her husband was in serious danger. A government-controlled newspaper would later reveal that he had been taken away for questioning by the CCP's discipline authorities. Due to the husband and wife living and working in France, the location of Interpol's main headquarters, Mrs. Meng would be given French police protection after being threatened by phone and internet. On October 6, 2018, Interpol would demand to know what the CCP had done with their president, with the next day the Chinese Central Commission for Discipline Inspection revealing they were holding Meng on bribery charges. Shortly after, Interpol would receive a letter of resignation from Meng, with the organisation making this public information. The problem was, though, that Interpol's press release failed to mention that Meng may have been made to resign under duress. Extremely angry with this, Mrs. Meng threatened Interpol with legal action over failing to investigate the authenticity of the resignation letter. According to the BBC, the Communist Party said Meng had abused his position for personal gain, misused state funds to finance his family's extravagant lifestyle, and disregarded Communist Party principles. Due to this, Meng would end up being thrown in prison for 13.5 years. In April 2019, Meng's wife sued Interpol for failing to assist her at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. In 2021, she criticised the Chinese government as being a monster because she said in a figurative sense that they eat their children. She said the charges of accepting bribes were trumped up, and that the CCP really purged him because he used his high-profile position to push for change. It's a fake case is an example of political disagreement being turned into a criminal affair. The extent of corruption in China today is extremely serious. It's everywhere. But there are two different opinions about how to solve corruption. One is the method used now, the other is to move towards constitutional democracy to solve the problem at its roots. Critics of the CCP say that campaigns like this are used to great effect to silence the CCP's political rivals. But considering that Chun-Li has been a Chinese woman working for Interpol for so long, she must be doing something right in the eyes of this authoritarian regime. Aside from the disappearance of Meng Hongwei, China have been continually noticed to abuse the use of Interpol in order to target political enemies, with sadly China not being the only country up to this nonsense. In 2021 it will be found that China, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Venezuela and Russia were all abusing the system in the same way. On the surface, Interpol have policies in place forbidding the organisation from pursuing political opponents, but autocrats from the countries we have just mentioned abuse their competition in their ongoing war against freedom and free speech. If indeed Interpol in the real world lines up with Interpol that features in Street Fighter, considering her high position in the organisation, this would make it almost a certainty that Chun-Li is up to no good somewhere. Probably the most well-known example of China and Interpol working together at their worst was how the CCP used Interpol as a tool against the Uyghurs. The situation concerning China and the Uyghurs is a complex and sensitive topic. The Uyghurs are a predominantly Muslim ethnic minority group concentrated in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China. There have been numerous reports and allegations regarding human rights abuses against Uyghurs by the Chinese government. According to various sources, including testimonies from Uyghur individuals and leaked official documents, the Chinese government have been accused of implementing policies that violate the human rights of the Uyghurs. These policies reportedly include mass surveillance, arbitrary detentions, forced labour, cultural assimilation efforts, and restrictions on religious practices. The Chinese government initially denied the existence of mass detention camps in Xinjiang, but later referred to them as re-education or vocational training centres aimed at combating extremism and terrorism. They have described their actions as necessary for maintaining stability and security in the region. The international community has expressed concerns about the situation. Some countries and organisations have labelled the treatment of the Uyghurs as genocide or crimes against humanity. Others have called for independent investigations to assess the situation accurately. China used Interpol against the Uyghurs, where the government issued a red notice against activists and other members of the ethnic minority group living abroad. Since 1997, 1,546 cases from 28 countries of detention and deportation of Uyghurs were recorded. Beyond all of this, China and other non-democratic states have been known to use Interpol to harass journalists, human rights activists and businessmen they don't like. Further to all of this, in 2016, Taiwan criticised Interpol for turning down their application to join the General Assembly as an observer. The United States supported Taiwan's participation, and the US Congress passed legislation directing the Secretary of State to develop a strategy to obtain observer status for Taiwan. But in order to appease China, Interpol rejected Taiwan's observer status. So bearing all of this information in mind, considering that Chun-Li is high up in Interpol and she is yet to be thrown in prison by the CCP, a strong case can be made that she is likely part of all of these problems. Interpol's decision-making process lacks transparency and accountability, particularly when issuing their infamous red notices. It is clearly evident that politically motivated requests can be exploited to target political opponents or activists, leading to potential abuses of power. This undermines the credibility and impartiality of Interpol and raises concerns about due process and fair treatment. Pair all of this with the organisations facing criticism for cooperating with countries that have poor human rights records. The organisation is regularly accused of facilitating the extradition of individuals to countries where they will face torture, unfair trials, or other human rights abuses. Fortunately for all of us, considering Street Fighter is just a game, we can suspend our disbelief and pretend to ourselves that the Interpol and People's Republic of China behave differently in the realm of Street Fighter to how they operate in the real world. So we can easily continue to still loving Chun-Li in the game. But if Chun-Li was a real person, I certainly wouldn't trust someone who took a job to try and carry out a revenge killing, who would later take part in the silencing of the CCP's political opponents, journalists, human rights activists, and that's without even bringing up the Uyghur situation. Chun-Li may not be presented as a villain in Street Fighter, but if she was a real person, there is no doubt that she would be just another pawn of the CCP. So ladies and gentlemen, I clearly thought more about this one than Capcom ever has. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Should the Japanese company distance this character from Interpol? Subscribe and let us know.